This is NFA Talk, the show that talks about guns and gun rights, keeping you up to date with what's currently going on, from the newest guns, promotions, and events, plus how we're lobbying for your rights.
We have a special guest with us, Erin O'Toole, and he's from the CPC. He's running for the leadership. As well, we have Sheldon Clare, who's the president of the National Firearms Association. Also joined with us is Charles Zach, our executive director. Hi, guys. Welcome.
Hello. Thank you very much, Jordan. Erin, really great that you're here today. I think the last time we actually met was Prince George, BC, where I'm sitting now, when you came down to our Legion, and we were talking about veterans issues with us. Very much appreciated meeting you then, and looking forward to hearing what you have to say with us today.
Yeah, I remember being in that. I remember being in that Legion with you and Todd and great veteran advocates like Joe Elliott and others. It's always great to be in BC, and PG was great.
Oh, thank you, and you're welcome back anytime. So our focus today, of course, isn't veterans issues so much as it is firearms rights and advocacy. And I guess we wanted to go through our survey questions that you've already responded to and try to get a little bit more out of you about those answers and make sure we're talking to someone who's going to really be doing a good job for us. And I guess an overarching question that we want to talk about first is firearms issues. Do you see these as a winning issue for the Conservative Party in the next election? Like, is this something that has national cachet, that it does resonate with people? I mean, we've seen with the COVID issue, firearm sales have gone way up. Lots of people are interested in the matter. Discussion online is huge. And I think the platform in the world in this country has certainly changed in the last month and a half a great deal. So where are you on that as a general overarching question?
Well, thanks, Sheldon. As you know, since I was elected 7 years ago in a by-election in the Toronto area, I've been an ardent supporter of firearms rights. And I've actually fought against the Liberal mischaracterization of Canadians who sport shoot, who hunt, because they have a divisive and, quite frankly, wrong-headed approach to rights, to public safety. So I do think it's a fundamental element of the Conservative Party. We stand up for the rights of Canadians. Property rights, we stand up for individual liberty, these sorts of things, and we will take on abuse of those rights by the Liberals, by big government. And so I do think it's fundamental to our offering as a modern Conservative Party, where we have a brokerage party on the right that has libertarians, social conservatives, red Tories, fiscal policy, and foreign policy hawks. This is a fundamental tenet for our party, and I've been a strong and principled defender of those rights since I became an MP.
Very good. Yeah, appreciate that, Erin. So let's have a look at the questions. Now, the first one that we put on our survey was, do you support the removal of non-victim, non-violent firearm offenses from the criminal code? Now, this goes way back to the legislation from the 1970s, C-51, about starting to classify firearms, trying to say that certain inanimate objects are worse than others, rather than an approach that was based on behavior, which is the older legal approach. Now, you of course said, yes, I support that, but I'd like to flesh that out a little bit more, because this is about things that came from liberal firearms policy, like the license, the classification of firearms, and the registration of firearms. This is all long-held liberal gun control. So where is Erin O'Toole on liberal gun control in modern law?
Well, as I said at the outset, the Liberals get everything backwards. They trample on rights, and they actually don't do anything for public safety and public security. This is a great point, why I answered yes, Sheldon. The expiry of someone's license, if that person has the license, has done the qualifications, the training for the PAL, and is in accordance with that, a small administrative thing related to a license has nothing to do with public safety and security. And to suggest it does shows a profound lack of understanding. So that's why I answered that. I've often said that the Liberals play lip service to public safety, and what they do is they go after law-abiding citizens rather than tackling the real challenges of some of the organized and gang violence in some of the cities, working with law enforcement on that. They instead go this administrative route, which is not only unfair and divisive, it's actually not helpful for public safety.
Exactly. And I think the aspect, of course, of concern is originally the firearms license was a tax measure. It was a provincial, it was regulated in the provincial division of powers in the Constitution, sections 91 and 92. And it was a tax. The license was a tax, just like a vehicle driver's license is really a tax. It's not really about public safety at all. And then it got flipped into a federal regulatory license with criminal code penalties attached to paperwork offenses. So it's really good to hear your answer on that. The second one.
Can I just jump in for a second?
Yeah, go ahead, Charlie.
I think this is an important point, and I think this is one of the reasons we made it as number one question. I mean, we deal with this a lot. I mean, there's a lot of people that don't understand the law, are caught on the fringes of the law. Some of the law isn't even defined properly. So there's a lot of tripwires where a lot of our community get entangled in this, and ultimately they have to go to court for this. And eventually they are found innocent, but the judicial process is part of the punishment. And after, months, sometimes years of, going to court and spending thousands of dollars on trying to exonerate yourself, you're finally found innocent, and you do get your guns back. But it's really persecution if you really look at it. And at the end, those poor people are harmed by the system. And that's what this first question really talks about. I'm really glad that you're on board with that, because we see this all the time, and it hurts my heart when I talk to these people, and we need a champion like you in Parliament to take that forward.
Great.
Yeah, no, can you imagine when, for administrative purposes, we're taking law enforcement and judicial resources away from actually tackling crime and going down to license renewals and what is purely administrative. And so I've often said the Liberals play this game with a lot of people that don't understand firearms. They don't understand the hunting, the sports shooting community, how responsible these Canadians are, the most law-abiding. We know that. They are actually taking finite resources from our criminal justice system and using them for symbolic administrative measures, as opposed to allowing those resources to go after the real sources of crime, whether it's gangs, organized crime, smuggling operations. We have to focus on the serious part of public safety. And the whole Liberal approach when it comes to law-abiding owners has been to demonize them and suggest to Canadians that that's the way to keep people safe from a shooting in the city, when in actual fact, it's taking resources away from frontline public safety response.
Very good.
Thank you, Erin. The next question was, do you support a repeal of firearm legislation which has not provided any evidence of benefit to public safety, including the former bills C-71 of 2019, C-42 of 2015, which had a couple of things of interest, but also some problems that resulted in more gun control. C-68, the Liberal Firearms Bill of 1995, which brought in the license. C-17, which brought in things like magazine restrictions and prohibited a whole range of firearms.
Uh-oh.
Looks like we lost him.
Yeah, so I'll just pick it up from there while he jumps back in, and apologize to our viewers for the technical difficulties. So the question is, do you support repeal of the firearms legislation? And Sheldon was getting into that, and
yeah, I can see them there on the screen.
So go ahead and flesh that out for us, Erin.
Yeah, no, like what I said, as you know, Charles, and Sheldon and I have talked about this in the last leadership race. Oh, there he is. In the last leadership race, I called for an overhaul of the legislation, Firearms Act in Canada, because of this piecemeal sort of politicization by the Liberals over time, to the point that it's inherently unfair to end users, sports shooters, hunters, and often allows for flip-flopping of positions with respect to classification, uncertainty with respect to what the term variant and other things means. So I've said that we need to do a line by line review and an overhaul of our legislation to make it fair and to engage manufacturers and users in the process. To think that the classification can be done without properly involving the manufacturer and the end user is probably the only example of any type of regulation that's done without actually asking the people involved in manufacturing the item, like autos or other areas. So I think what we need is an overhaul. I've committed to that. I committed to that in 2017, as you guys know. I'm still committed to that. And I think doing that will also show Canadians how politicized the Liberals have made these issues.
Exactly.
Well, one of the things that's an issue for in terms of classification is that it has in effect stolen people's property and the ability to pass on that property to their heirs and successors. And that's really goes to our next question, because when firearms started to get classified, like in 1935 with the restricted category being created for handguns, people sort of accepted that because it didn't affect that they could use them. They could still hunt with handguns. They could still, be able to carry them, but they were just put on a list. In World War II, that list was extended to include other firearms as well, and that fell apart mainly in the 1950s, but not for the handguns. And then in the late 1960s and during the 1970s, classification was used to engage a new category called prohibited. And what this meant is that they started saying, well, these things you cannot own. And that category has been one that's been growing and growing and growing, and it's not been very helpful for firearms owners to be able to deal with that. So what is your view on the protecting the right of firearm owners to enjoy the use of their property?
Well, that goes to kind of what I said to the previous answer. I think over time, and Sheldon, you know the history of it a lot better than I think most Canadians, over time, not only has it not served the intended purpose, it's actually undermined the confidence of the people that are users in the communities, whether they just be a collector or whether they're users like sports shooters or hunters. That's why I've said an overhaul is needed to fix the whole system, to reinstill confidence, including in the classification system. When a colleague had introduced a bill to provide clarity around the term variant, I supported that private members bill from a few years ago because it was attempting to provide clarity within the classification system, which had become increasingly arbitrary and flipping positions that even the RCMP held a few years previously. And as you said, it would then project that those lawful owners were somehow in a position of breaking the law because someone changed their opinion because of color or some opaque reason. So I think this is why a full-scale overhaul is needed to provide not only clarity, but fairness.
So thanks for that, Erin. Appreciate your candid responses. Now, what about property rights? So this is a pretty easy question for a conservative. Do you support entrenchment of property rights in Canadian law? I mean, this goes back to long-held beliefs of conservative philosophy. Deef the Chief and his Bill of Rights, it had property rights in the Bill of Rights, but Bill of Rights didn't make it into the Charter, or property rights didn't make it into the Charter. That Bill of Rights didn't get carried over, and it was explicitly excluded. So maybe that's something we need to have a talk about. That would help protect people's property that way. What's your view on that?
Well, certainly as a conservative, I strongly support and defend property rights. The one caveat I always say, and I think I've mentioned this maybe even to Charles in the past, I can't recall, is I was at military college back where I was in the military is how I was taught to use firearms as a tool. And in fact, we used to lock our rifles up in our rooms with a little chain and padlock as part of the military specifications. But while I was there, we were going through the Meech Lake and Charlottetown Accords and all that constitutional wrangling. So while I'm a strong supporter of property rights and making sure that legislation anticipate and protect those, which is why I want to see an overhaul of Firearms Act legislation. I don't support reopening the Constitution because I do think it creates divisions within the country, and I'm not sure. Even though I think it was something that was missed, and Diefenbaker had it in the Bill of Rights, and it was a real miss. I'm always clear to say when I say I support that, it doesn't mean I'm going to launch us on a series of constitutional negotiations like we saw back with the Meech Lake process. What we have to do is try and safeguard property rights with each act of a parliament. And to reverse unfair acts of a previous parliament. And you can do that without any constitutional changes.
Very good. I think we lost Sheldon again. Let's go. I think we skipped the question number 4. Do you support the elimination of firearms classification system so as to return the ability of firearms owners to freely use, buy, sell, trade, inherit, and pass on to their heirs all the firearms property? You initially said yes to this, but then you had a commentary at the end that qualified your answer. We changed it to no because it was a yes and no response. But I'd like you to speak to your comment, just to flesh that out for the people out there who are listening.
Yeah, absolutely. What I said, and Sheldon touched on this, is yes, I support overhauling or I don't support the elimination of classification, but I support the overhauling of the process. As I said in my previous answers, Charles, I think it's inherently unfair and has been arbitrary, and to a point where the people that are users have no confidence in it, and it's actually deemed some of them to be unlawful because of the whims of a bureaucratic decision. So that shows the process is deeply flawed and it needs to have an overhaul. What I've said always about this, including back in 2017, as you may remember, when I said we want to do the overhaul, I want manufacturers and users at the table. That's been the real problem here is increasingly the classification system has been arbitrary, and I feel, quite frankly, has been politically driven by unaccountable people in Ottawa. So I'm a big fan of transparency. And so as part of my overhaul, we're going to bring users on board and manufacturers. The very fact that you're going to have regulation and you're not involving the companies involved in the manufacture of the item is crazy, I think.
For sure.
Absolutely.
Back.
Yeah, I've been having a little bit of connection problems here. I think it's sorted out now. Were you to become prime minister and have to develop policy, what sort of tools do you see that you would be using? Well, first of all, within the lead as leader of the party, to engage party members on this, and how do you reconcile differences within the party about firearms? Because as I know, being a founding member of the Reform Party and also a founding member of the Conservative Party, it's not exactly a unified group in many respects. It's a coalition, as you pointed out at the start. And how do you see bringing that coalition together to focus on firearms issues?
Well, that's the job of any leader. And I do think that the Conservative Party did that quite well. And as owners know, once Stephen Harper got his majority, as you know, there were several minority parliaments before his majority of 2011. He kept that commitment of eliminating the unfair long gun registry. And there were a lot of MPs that had been advocates on that file, people like Jerry Bregreitz, and of course Candace Bergen, who's still our House leader. And
James Bazan.
Oh, a whole range of folks that I think were very helpful. And as you know, we have a very active hunting and angling caucus. We talk about not only the inherent rights of owners, but the cultural aspects of hunting and that sort of conservative culture, which is about respecting traditions that families have. A lot of Canadians learn to hunt or shoot from their father or grandfather just as much as the quintessential backyard hockey rink. And so I think Conservatives have kept that commitment, and the leader my biggest goal will be to make sure that all members of our political family feel respected. As I've said many times in this leadership race, there are no albatrosses in my Conservative Party. The leader has to make sure that people are fulfilled, whether they're social conservatives, more libertarian-minded, and are more engaged on firearms rights. All those people have to feel respected by the leader and part of us going forward as a party. And I give you that commitment. And in many ways, I think I'm the natural person to do it. I haven't been in politics for 30 years. I was the last minister appointed by Stephen Harper to turn around a file that was in crisis. And I did that by sticking to my principles, building a team, and taking on people that tried to define us. In that case, the public sector union was spending millions of dollars on the veterans issue. I started taking them on for their false narratives and for what they were doing in terms of money and misinformation. I don't like it when other people define us. We will define us.
Exactly.
And on the firearms issue, the Liberals, going back to Alan Rock, have played this game with Canadians where they try and suggest, after a terrible shooting or gang violence in the city of Toronto or Vancouver or wherever, Winnipeg, that the solution to that is somehow going after a group of people that we actually know statistically are amongst the most law-abiding. So not only is that divisive and unfair, it's actually not tackling the public safety issues themselves. It's actually quite shameful that Bill Blair was the chief of police in Toronto, who actually knows and was known for some of his measures with respect to the G7 and other things for an approach on public safety, and now is tasked to be Trudeau's errand boy on this issue. It's pretty sad, actually, and I've challenged him not only in the House but on television. So I don't let other people define us, Sheldon. Conservatives need to define ourselves.
Exactly. I would make one minor point that originally, Mr. Harper's commitment was to repeal Bill C-68, which was a little bit more than just the registry. So I do want to point that out, but certainly the Liberal efforts of gun control have been the strongest. Kim Campbell, of course, was not a Liberal, or not by party affiliation anyway, but her efforts with C-17 were certainly very harmful to the firearms community and served no public safety interest at all. Well, I guess at the end of this, I want to thank you for coming on, Erin. And I want to ask you if you have anything. Oh, Charlie, do you have something?
You just you didn't do the last question.
Oh, yes. Pardon me. The last question. The ownership and use of firearms for protection, a civil right, notwithstanding court interpretations that say otherwise. Is it okay for people to protect themselves?
Yeah, it's a common law defense and has always been. The one proviso I always add is that should be proportional as much as possible in the context of someone defending themselves. And I've stood up for that, as have others. And I think this is once again the question of who do you look at, the person perpetrating the crime or the person trying to defend themselves? It's all how people frame the argument, right? You can see the conservatives are always saying that person would not have had to use self-defense, but for the fact they were attacked, right? And so what we have to do is make sure that when there's a circumstance like this, we don't let our political opponents or some voices in the media define it. It's we have to say people have an inherent self-defense right. It should be used proportionally, but it's only used when someone has threatened them. So let's look and see at where the real problem is, and it's usually with criminals and people perpetrating crimes, not someone trying to defend themselves from it.
Exactly. There wouldn't be a need for the defense if there wasn't an attack. Okay, well, thank you for that. I guess this is the part of our discussion where we want you to be able to promote yourself a little bit. Why should people vote for you to be the next leader of the Conservative Party and thus hopefully the next Prime Minister of Canada? How do they go about getting involved in the process to be able to choose that person? And let's hear from you. What do you have to say about that?
Well, thanks, Sheldon, first for the opportunity. And over the years, certainly we've got to know each other, and Charles and a number of your members across the country. You're always smart advocates. You know your stuff, as you could see even from your review of the history of the legislation today. I appreciate working with smart advocates. I am the candidate in this race that's the true blue conservative that will stand up for the rights of law-abiding firearms owners, and that has been an unabashed conservative in the House of Commons for 7 years. I'm not a career politician. I spent 12 years in the Canadian Armed Forces, where I learned in Chilliwack at my basic training in BC how to use a firearm as a tool responsibly and trained, as do all firearms owners in Canada. Use that right with responsibility. And that's why I've defended that, not only through my military time and my time in the private sector as a lawyer, as a parliamentarian. I've been consistent. Your group gave me an A for my platform in 2017, and I hope to gain your support again this time. Also important, I can win where we need to win. In Southern Ontario, where there's 60 plus seats that we need to win to form government. I am a 905, a Toronto area conservative MP, unabashed, but we need more men and women in office from Ontario to make sure that we hold the balance of power and win the next election. I'm an MP now, Sheldon. So unlike Peter MacKay, who I understand didn't even respond to your survey, I've responded. I appreciate coming on with you. I'm in the House of Commons now. I was there Saturday with my colleagues for the emergency COVID-19 legislation. I'm there on day one to hold Mr. Trudeau to account and set a plan to get Canada out of this economic and health crisis onto a path of prosperity. And I can do that without sacrificing our principles as conservatives. I will unite our movement, grow our movement, and win. And I need people's support. ErinO'Toole.ca is our website where you can sign up in May when the race kind of resumes its form again. Hopefully when we've planked the curve and we're doing better. Donations are welcome, but really this is about me being accountable to you, earning your support, and hopefully you see in this race of the four candidates, I've been the most consistent over the last few years, defending and standing up for lawful firearms owners, and I will continue to be that way. And if we win together, we can win a majority conservative government, and I would be the first Canadian Armed Forces veteran to become Prime Minister in over half a century.
Cool.
I think the last one was Pearson, if I remember correctly. I would also say, what advantage do you have in getting support in Quebec? Because Quebec always becomes a big factor in these elections.
Je suis né à Montréal. Je parle français. I speak French. I was born in Montreal. My dad worked at GM at St. Therese in Montreal. Now, I didn't learn my French by the time I moved to Ontario at the age of 1, but I learned French in the military. I had to be functionally bilingual to graduate from Royal Military College in Kingston to get my commission as an officer in the RCAF. I did. I understand, Sheldon, we may be doing a Facebook Live or some sort of podcast en français aussi.
Oui, c'est ça.
Je parle toujours sur les doigts de les gens avec leur arme à feu. I can do the same thing. I'm not quite as eloquent. I speak more like a soldier in French than a diplomat, but it works.
Excellent. Well, we're very much looking forward to that, Erin, and thanks very much for joining us today. All the very best of luck to you in this race. There are some very good candidates with lots of good things to say, and we are really appreciative of everyone who's come on to our NFA talk to let us know why they deserve to be the leader of the Conservative Party and Canada's next Prime Minister. Thank you very much.
Yes,
thanks for the opportunity.
Thank you, Erin, and I hope we can have you on the show in the future. And thank you, everybody, for tuning in.
All right, thank you. Stay healthy.
Bye, Erin.
And we'll see you in French.
Thanks for listening to this episode of NFA Talk. Like and follow the NFA on social media and sign up to become a member.